really have a crisis right now. So I'm not going to talk about Canada. I'm going to talk about the Europe situation. Sergio has explained the appearance of global imbalances, and in particular current account imbalances inside the Eurozone. I agree with what John Weeks just said, that this should have been a small problem, and it turned out to be a large, disastrous problem. So in this presentation here, I'd like to explain why this is the case. And my answer essentially is that it's due to a failure or a flaw in the institutional design of the Eurozone and of the way the ECB, the European Central Bank, has been instructed to function. So why is it flawed? Why do we have these flaws? Well, my opinion is that it's due to a flawed economic theory which was at the origin of the Euro system. The assumption of when people constructed this Euro system, the assumption was that the financial markets were always right. There couldn't be, they couldn't make mistakes. So that was the first assumption, and from it, you could draw a second assumption, which was that, well, as long as the financial markets are looking at what the governments are doing, there can never be any financial crisis. So that was the assumption. So in other words, the ECB was not set up in a way to be able to face financial crisis faced by governments. Over a period of 20 years, various rules and regulations were being put forth in the various treaties that have been signed by the countries. But it's, whatever is the name of the treaty, the rules and regulations are always the same. So, about the ECB, what were those rules or conventions? The first one was that the ECB and the national central banks cannot make advances to governments. So that was the first rule. The second rule was that the ECB or the national central banks cannot purchase securities issued by the governments on primary markets. That was the second rule. The third rule was that it was possible for the ECB to it was possible for the ECB to of course to make, well, the only thing that the ECB was supposed to do was to make advances to the banks, to the commercial banks. So indirectly, through what is called repos and reverse repos, the ECB would purchase government securities for 1 week, promising to sell them back a week later. But this could not have really an impact on the prices of the sovereign debt of the government securities. Moreover, when these repo operations were being done, the condition was that the assets, whether they were private assets or government securities, these assets needed to carry a rating of at least A-. So the people at the center, well, the people designing this never thought that perhaps the rating of some of these assets would fall below A-. The only thing that was allowed in relation to government securities was that there is nothing in the rules that forbids open market operations, meaning intervention by the central bank on the secondary markets, which means there was nothing prohibiting the ECB from purchasing government securities on secondary markets. But this was supposed to be for exceptional or irregular circumstances. Some people, I often read in newspapers that there is a no bailout clause, but I went through all the rules and regulations, and all I could see was that there is indeed a no bailout clause, but does not apply to the ECB. The no bailout clause applies to the countries, members of the Eurozone, or to the European community, which is not supposed to help out countries in difficulties. So what we have is what we can call a pure overdraft systems, where banks are always in debt vis-à-vis the central bank, but where the ECB holds zero securities. And in fact, this was the case until May 2010. Right, so let's imagine now that for some reason, some countries from the south of Europe run into some economic difficulties, smaller income tax revenue, and therefore these countries have larger deficits than, say, the countries in the north, and because of that there is a higher supply of government securities coming from the south. Well, as long as the banks and the households accept to hold a larger proportion of their assets in the form of government securities coming from the south, there is no problem. But as long as these banks or pension funds or financial institutions don't want to increase their proportion of assets from the south, then what happens is that the prices of these securities must go down, and therefore the interest rates on these securities must rise. And then the problem is that if this seems to, from the point of view of the financial markets, if they believe that this can become a problem, in particular a possible problem of default, then it means that the rating of these assets might fall below A-, and this is exactly what happens. And then in this case, it becomes impossible for banks to borrow at the central bank, at the ECB. And as I said before, the system is such that the banks always need to borrow at the ECB. So that would imply a total collapse of the financial system. So that was, in fact, pointed out by a few people, a few of our heterodox colleagues. And up until recently, I was very skeptical myself of these arguments. And the reason is that I always believed that the politicians and the central bankers would be reasonable enough to realize that these rules did not make any sense. So, it turns out I was wrong, but, well, at least I was partially wrong. The central bankers at the ECB indeed ended up changing the rules. As we know, in May 2010, they started purchasing Greek debt, which on the secondary markets, as they were allowed to. Secondly, then they started buying the debt, the sovereign debt from Ireland and from Portugal. And then in August 2011, they went on buying Spanish and Italian debt. But it was always too late. I mean, whenever the ECB decided to move and go forward, it was always too late. And one of the reasons for this, and it has been mentioned by Sergio, is the resistance from the German economists who are working at the ECB and of course also of the Bundesbank. I was in Europe on the 10th of May 2010 when the ECB announced it would buy Greek bonds, and I mean in the French newspapers I could read the reaction of the German financial press, which was completely terrified, saying this was the biggest mistake that was ever been done. And afterwards, the ECB again made other moves. They said, all right, the credit rating of the Greek debt has fallen between below A-, so we will accept B+. And then when it fell below B+, they said, well, we'll accept any asset. We'll just take any asset. And then they did the same for Portuguese and Italian debt. So it's always too late. And frankly, I am quite pessimistic in the sense that, as was pointed out before, all these countries are pursuing fiscal consolidation. And as Lance Taylor said, all these countries are interrelated. So if one country pursues fiscal consolidation, of course it will have negative effects on the economy, but eventually it will be successful. But I believe that if all countries pursue fiscal consolidation together, then it will just make matters a lot worse. Thank you.